This is Past Force.
I've just been doing some research into pseudo-history, into the way people lie about history. And an article here, just searched on Google, and this one came up. It's by a man called Dominic Sandbrook, who has written some history books and done some BBC series. He did one on the Cold War, which was, you know what, I enjoyed watching it. And I've read his book on the late 50s as well. It was passable. He's, well, to put it mildly, he's a little suspect. And this article, let's go through it. It's called How the Culture Wars Came for History. And the byline is, woke historians want to expose lies about the past, even when they don't exist. Woke historians. He's claiming in this article that there's no such thing as historical lies. He's claiming that people, including politicians like the Prime Minister, don't lie about the past. Which is complete and utter bullshit. Because we know he does. We've got the evidence to prove it. Let's go through the article. It starts with a comparison to the Matrix. Enslaved by intelligent machines, mankind has been turned into a giant collective battery, our minds pacified with soothing stimulation. What most of us take to be reality is a lie, a construct, the product of a diabolical conspiracy. And then he compares this to the way people are treating history, saying, yeah, it's the same thing. This is what you've been led to believe history is. It's this unreality. It's not true. No mention that history actually is more complex and nuanced than that, especially academic history. It's not a matter of black and white. It's shades of grey. It gets misinterpreted, it gets lied about, it gets revised, changed. Yesterday's history is not today's history, is not tomorrow's history. It's not set in stone. But he doesn't seem to mention that. He seems to be saying history should be fixed. And he does this by reviewing a popular history book, Fake History, by a man called Otto English. Now I looked this up. It's a lightweight history book for the general public. It's not supposed to be academic. It's one of these books which it's a clickbait type book, really. It's written to sell copies, to make money, to go, look at this, it's all fake. But Sandbrook here, he seems to take offence at the fact that the author is... In fact, the first thing he mentions about the author is that he's anti-Brexit, as if that makes him an unreliable writer. Well, if we can't trust Otto English for being anti-Brexit, should we trust Sandbrook because he writes for the Daily Mail? It then goes on to explain what this book is about. It's about how history isn't quite what we think it is. There are things we take as truth which actually aren't truth. It's a simple concept. And yeah, that is the case. There are things that people believe which, they're not true. They're myths. They're like Chinese whispers that have passed down through time that people believe, but actually it turns out, no, not the case. Like, it's commonly believed that King Harold Godwinson was shot in the eye with an arrow at the Battle of Hastings. But actually, he probably wasn't. That's probably a later invention. That's like an example of, well, what this Otto English might include. That's the sort of thing he's talking about. Then compares the book to The Matrix again. And then he goes on to mention this is part of a bigger movement, as though there's some conspiracy to rewrite history, to rewrite the entire past. He mentions a series by Lucy Worsley, British History's Biggest Fibs. And then he mentions Horrible History's author Terry Deary, who he says has consistently maintained that school teachers and academics mislead their charges. First of all, you don't come for Lucy Worsley. Lucy Worsley is sacred. And you don't come for Terry Deary either, because, his books may, again, be populist, they may be aimed at a younger audience, but how many people have got into history because of Horrible Histories? I mean, it's even claimed that Horrible Histories is more accurate than the series is more accurate than the History Channel. And it's almost like in his writing, Sandbrook here is sneering at the idea of Horrible Histories, of this series by Lucy Worsley, which again was, I remember watching it and it was a good, entertaining series. Perhaps not anything you'd use academically, but it was good entertainment. And that's all these things really are supposed to be. They're entertainment. They're there to get people watching. They're not there to change the world. They're sort of a bit clickbaity, but nothing offensive. Sandbrook then goes on to again attack the author Otto English, who is apparently a journalist and who, again, he goes on to mention that he's anti-Brexit, as though this is something wrong, as though he shouldn't be anti-Brexit. He then seems to take offence that the book is not an academic history, as though the book is, well, what he calls an utter failure. Now, I've not read the book, so I can't comment on this, but it's a populist tome. It's a populist, clickbaity history book designed to sell copies. It's not an academic history. But Sandbrook here is treating it like it is supposed to be. And he's using that against the book. He calls it one of the worst books about history I've ever read. And clearly he hasn't read many history books because, well, I've read some stinkers. And I've read, well, a lot worse than, what this might be. I've read some real stinkers. Because there are some fucking terrible history books out there. He seems to claim that people don't lie about history, that people don't make things up. He says that professional historians, school teachers, politicians, they're not really liars, are they? Yes, they weave their facts into narratives, wear their prejudices very heavily, and sometimes make tendentious claims. But that's what historical debate is all about. Was Edward Gibbon a liar? Were the historians who wrote in the Victorian era? Were Marxists like Eric Hobsbawm and Christopher Hill? And then he goes on to mention politicians who pick their facts and tell their stories. And then he specifically mentions Boris Johnson, who we know has lied about history. He calls it adolescent, as though it's wrong to want to reinterpret the past, as though it's wrong to try and say, well, actually, to try and tell the general public, well, actually, it's not quite as simple as that. It's not quite true. And then we get the final paragraph. For English, as for so many woke activists, it's all very simple. You're awake or you're asleep. You're progressive or you're reactionary. You think roads must fall, or you like having sex with statues. You can see or you're blind. You're with Neo or you're with the machines. Like, wow. This is a populist history book. It's not supposed to be taken seriously, but Sandbrook here is using it as a weapon to say, oh, look at this. Aren't these liberals bad? Aren't these woke activists trying to rewrite everything? It's part of this anti-woke brigade. It's trying to inflame people against someone who is anti-Brexit. You can really see Sandbrook's agenda in this article. As I said earlier, he writes for the Daily Mail. This isn't a Daily Mail article, by the way. This is just on some website I found. But because he writes for the Daily Mail, a source that is not to be trusted on the whole, that's no reason to completely dismiss Sandbrook. Because he's a conservative historian, because he's not left-wing, that's no reason not to distrust Sandbrook. He is, after all, a trained historian. But the guy is shady, to say the least. For one of his books, he was accused of plagiarism, and he also somehow managed to write at least 3 1,000-page history books in 3 years. 1,000 pages each. 3,000 pages. Oh, and these aren't big writing. This is tiny writing. 3 1,000-page history books in 3 years. That's not possible. If that were possible, I'd be nearly done with my PhD now. And there's something else as well, which it's the reason this article caught my attention, because I saw something in Private Eye, again Private Eye, who seems to be at the moment my best friend against pseudo-history, and it's about a new series of books by, would you guess it, Dominic Sandbrook. And it opens with a quote from him. "At a time when history is under unrelenting attack, this is my personal crusade to convert Britain's young readers to the joys of the past, free from political dogma." Is this article here on the internet free from political dogma? No, it's not. It's a right-wing attack. It's vitriolic because someone is anti-Brexit, a Remainer. So this is about his new series of books for children, Adventures in Time. And according to Sandbrook, he had the idea after failing to find any books about World War II for his 8-year-old son. These days, he discovered, histories aimed at young readers are earnest treatises about imperialism and racism. No frills, no drama, no rollicking tales. Again, it's this anti-woke thing. It's like saying, well, you can't reinterpret the past into a more liberal viewpoint. You can't view the past from a liberal viewpoint. Apparently that's wrong. And it all seems to suggest that he's never heard of horrible histories. Clearly, according to this internet article, he has. And I'm wondering if this isn't... he's not written this series because he's, well, going on a right-wing crusade. If he's not deciding that horrible histories is wrong and that he wants to put his own version out there. This is an example of how people can use the past as a weapon. A weapon to push forward their own ideology, their own ideas. This is someone who is conservative. Don't know how right-wing he is, but, well, right of centre at least. And someone who is using history to push their own agenda, to push their own interpretation. And apparently, if you take the other view, you're wrong. You're somehow woke. You're somehow not to be trusted. Well, when you dig a little deeper, when you analyse this review, this article, when you analyse Sandbrook himself, his accusations of, well, the accusations of plagiarism around him, the fact that he mysteriously wrote 3 1,000-page history books in 3 years, the fact that he writes for the Daily Mail frequently, and the fact that he seems to be on a right-wing crusade. It's concerning. seems to be spreading this idea that history should be one thing, that there's no room for reinterpretation. There's no room for revisionism. Yet, this is coming from a man who wrote a book which was a revisionist history book where he tried to change the common idea of the 60s, that actually the 60s wasn't this swinging hedonistic time. It only swung for a few in like London. It's hypocritical.
History! It's a thing of the past!
It's a thing of the past.